Hi, I'm Candace and welcome to my channel. I recently finished making this pair of trousers. These are the Protea Pants by Paradise Patterns, and they are possibly my favorite make ever. They are the perfect linen trousers for summer. So if you want to see how I made them, make sure to keep watching. I cut out all my fabric and my pattern pieces before this video, so we're just gonna jump right in. I'm using a white stretch linen that I got from Minerva.com, and I just used a zipper that I had in my stash. And we're just jumping right in and cutting the extension off the right front pant leg, and then I added some interfacing to the pocket openings just to give it some stability. I'm using a medium weight woven interfacing, and here I am just pressing it on with lots of steam. You want to make sure that you're just pressing in a downward motion and not sliding your iron around too much when you're applying interfacing. And here are my front pant pieces. So the only change I made to this pattern was changing the single pleat to double pleats, just because I like the look a little better. And that was a really easy change to make. I just distributed the width of the single pleat between two double pleats and kind of eyeballed where I wanted them to sit. I folded the pleats away from the center front and then just sewed them down like I would have sewn the single pleat. And here is what they look like. So here we have the two front pieces done, and now we're going to move on to the pocket. I love these pockets because they're really big and they're also anchored into the fly, which I really love. They also have this facing here, so we're just sewing that on. And I've edge stitched it, and now we're going to place it on top of the other pocket bag and pin it along the bottom edge. These pockets are French seamed, so this is wrong sides together. So we're just going to sew that together and then trim the seam allowance to 1/8 of an inch so it's easier to sew the second seam of the French seam. Then we're going to flip the pocket bag around so that right sides are facing and sew it together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. To get a really nice French seam, it's important to press it well and make sure the seam is right in the center. Here I noticed there was a tiny hole in my pocket, so I had to go re-sew that before sewing the second seam. And here are the pocket bags all finished. And now we're just going to sew down those lines, and then we're going to sew the pockets to the front pant. To be completely honest, these steps kind of confused me a bit because I never sew French seamed pockets, and the line in the center, I didn't know what that was for, but that's just to close off the pocket from going too deep towards the center. My fabric was pretty heavy, so I do kind of wish I had serged the pockets, but they do really look nice, so it's okay. Next up, we're going to sew the fly. So here are the fly pieces. This is the fly guard, and there's also a fly facing. So we sewed the bottom edge, flipped it inside out, and serged the other side, and then we're going to place the zipper on and sew it down. And here is the fly facing piece. We're going to finish the rounded edge, and then we're going to sew that to the right front pant leg. Then we're going to flip the facing over and understitch it down. I don't know if you guys use hump jumpers, but I use them almost every time I sew pants, and probably almost every time I sew anything. They're perfect for bulky seams. Now that we have our fly facing sewn onto the right pant, we're going to take our left pant and put the fly guard and the zipper that we sewed on earlier and top stitch that down. Then we're going to place our left front leg over the right front leg, lining up the crotch. Then we're going to sew just a couple inches below the notch, leaving 2 inches free. Next, we'll sew the zipper to the fly facing, and you should have a beautiful functioning zipper fly after that. The last step is to top stitch the fly. This took me a couple tries to get it looking decent. It still doesn't look the best, but it's all right. And then we moved on to the darts on the back pieces. This is how I like to mark darts with pins. I think it makes it a lot easier. I just mark the legs horizontally first, and then I fold the dart and then push the pin vertically, so then the pins are exactly on the dart legs. And then we're going to sew the darts. I love the laser guide on my Epic 95Q. It makes sewing straight lines so easy, and I especially love it for darts. Always leave some long thread tails so you can tie a knot on the end of your darts. Then it was time to press them well. I also used a tailor's ham just to try to get the point a little less pointy on these. I repeated it on the other side, and now it's time to sew the legs together. I'm laying the back on the front, right sides together, and just pinning down from the crotch to the hem. I sewed both of my inseams, and then I finished the raw edges with my serger. This is my brand new serger that was gifted to me from Viking, and it is an air threaded serger, and it is amazing. I can thread the whole machine in about 30 seconds. I love it. And next we're going to sew the side seams of the pants. So here I am just lining up the front and back pieces right sides together and pinning them from the top to the hem. After the side seams, it's time to sew the crotch. So you're going to take one leg of your pants, turn it right side out, and then put it inside the other pant leg, which is wrong side out. The crotch seams should be right sides together, and then you're just going to pin and sew all along the remainder of the crotch seam. Okay, I have these at the try-on stage. I'm really happy with them. I love these super wide legs, and I think changing it to 2 pleats instead of 1 worked out really well. I like it. The only thing is I have to take out quite a bit in the back. I'd say maybe like 2 inches. So I'm going to try to take the extra width out by putting it into the darts, because I don't want to mess with putting it into the center back, and also the side seams have these beautiful clean pockets. So I'm going to try to put them all into the darts. They are so gorgeous. Can't wait to wear them. Can't wait to finish them. I had to unpick my darts first, of course, and then I took the measurement that I needed to take the pants in by, and I added half of that measurement to each dart. So basically I just made the darts a bit bigger. I marked the new dart lines down to the original dart point, and then I sewed them down, but then I realized the darts were a bit too wide for that length. Okay, that is much better. I added 1.5 inches to each dart. Now they're a little pointy though, so I haven't pressed them yet, but hopefully that helps. Now we just have to attach the waistband and belt loops, and then we're done. Oh, and then the hem, but then we're done. So here are the new darts. I would say they're about double the size of the old ones. I also ended up extending them down a bit further because they were kind of like popping out, because there's so much more fabric to fit into them. It was like too severe of an angle. So I'm hoping that that helps. I also sewed them in a little bit of a curve, and I'm gonna give them a good press, and hopefully they're not pointy anymore. But the fit is looking so good, and I'm super excited to finish these. All right, what are we on, day 20 of making these pants? Everything is so slow when you have kids, but baby is down for a nap, and I am so close to being done these pants. Just the waistband is left, and I'm feeling very inspired today because last night I went to a mending event in Toronto with my friend Abby, and it was hosted by Wendy of With Wendy, and it was so much fun, and it was amazing to be in a big room of people that are interested in the same hobby, and it was so nice to meet Wendy. She was super sweet, and it was just an all-around great night. This is my little embroidery sample that I did. My French knots need a little work, but I learned some embroidery stitches and also how to darn. I darned a hole in a sweater. It doesn't look that great, but now I know how to do it. So anyways, before my baby wakes up, I'm going to get started and hopefully finish these pants. So the last things to do are sew the belt loops and attach the waistband. Here I am sewing the belt loops. You sew them in one long strip, and then you turn it inside out, kind of like a spaghetti strap, and then you cut them into 5 pieces for your loops. Turning straps is probably one of my least favorite things in sewing. It always takes so long, and it's so fiddly, and I often lose the end in the middle of the strap, which is super frustrating, but the loop turner is your friend most of the time. I definitely prefer it over a safety pin. So here I am just pressing that nice and flat and making sure the seam is right at the side. And then I'm using the handy dandy ruler on the bottom of my machine to measure out my loops. I just measured one and then used that one to cut all of the rest of them. And now it's time to pin those onto the pants. I lined up the front ones with the front pleats, and the back ones go on the center back, and then the other 2 go in between the center back and the side seam. Something I always forget to do is add a tag, so this time I remembered and pulled out these beautiful ones I got from Blackbird Fabrics and just sewed that into the center back before attaching the waist. And here I am prepping the inner waistband by pressing the bottom seam allowance up to the wrong side, and then I sewed the waistband pieces together along the top edge right sides together. This is how the waistband should be looking after it's sewn together, and then we're just going to understitch that inner waistband. And then it was time to attach the waistband to the pants. So I attached the outer waistband right sides together with the pants and just pinned it all the way around. I worked out from the center, making sure that there was the correct amount of seam allowance hanging over the edge. Then it was time to just sew all the way around, and here's how it looks once it is sewn. And now it's just time to sew the inner part of the waistband to create those square corners just above the fly. I really love the laser guide on my Epic 95Q. It makes sewing things like waistbands super easy, as you can see exactly where you're stitching. And now I'm just turning those corners out, and they look beautiful and straight and sharp. I like to fold the seam allowance like this before turning the waistband out, as it gives it a little bit of structure behind it and keeps it looking nice and straight. I also love using these tweezers for pushing out corners, as it really gets them nice and sharp. And then it was time to hand sew the inside of the waistband down. I'm using these vintage sewing needles that I inherited from a family friend of mine. I love vintage sewing needle packages. They're so beautiful, and I feel like they make hand sewing just a little bit more enjoyable. The instructions actually have you machine sew the waistband down, but I find that I can never get it as clean as I like, so I like to just hand sew it down so that it's totally invisible and beautiful on the inside. My little guy woke up just before I was done with the belt loops, so just those to go, plus the hook and eye and the hems.
Do you like my
I passed them off to my husband though, so I could finish off these pants. And I grabbed some hook and eyes from my stash. These are also vintage. And also decided to put a button on the inner waistband just to give it some more structure and to hold them up better. Sewing buttonholes has to be one of the most stressful things about sewing a garment. You do it at the end and you always just pray that you don't mess it up, because it's literally like the final step. And of course I did mess up the first buttonhole that I sewed, so here I am just picking it out. And this was try number 2, and I decided to do a manual buttonhole instead of the automatic one, as it just gives me a bit more control over it. And I was very happy with this one, so we went ahead and cut it open. I somehow have lost my buttonhole chisel, so we did it the old-fashioned way. I put a pin in the end of the buttonhole, and then I just used a seam ripper to open it up. I really don't like using this, so I definitely have to buy myself a new buttonhole chisel, because this is also very risky. You can rip a giant hole in your garment right as you're finishing it up. Luckily, everything was okay, and I put a little bit of fray check on there just to keep it from fraying. I marked and sewed one hem, and just doing a final fit check with the closures just to make sure they're working right. And we're gonna sew the other hem now. So I'm just going to line up the inseams of my pants, making sure they're right on top of each other. Then I laid the pants flat on the table and just marked the bottom of the hem on the unhemmed leg. I wanted a really wide hem, so then I marked 2 inches below that line as my cut line. And then I just grabbed the piece that I cut off the first leg just to make sure that I was cutting them at the same length. Everything looked good, so then we just trimmed off that bottom piece. Then I just pressed my hems. I pressed it up the entire length first, and then I pressed the bottom part up by 1/4 inch so that when I sewed it there would be no raw edges showing. Here's what those pressed lines should look like, and I'm going to sew from the wrong side and just edge stitch close to the fold. And now we're finally at the last step of these pants, and that is securing the top of the belt loops to the waistband. I just measured and cut off the excess and then folded it to the inside, and I'm sewing them down using this amazing belt loop stitch on my machine. It sews 4 tiny little stitches horizontally to secure belt loops. I used my little hump jumper to do these, and it made the whole thing such a breeze. And finally, here are the finished pants. I love them so much. They are the perfect white linen summer pants. I hope you like this video, and if you want to see more, definitely make sure to subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks for watching.